Hi there, this is Tiffany from iHeartArtBlog.com, and I'm on the Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft team, and I thought I would revisit some art grip color pencil techniques. I have recently gotten rid of all my Copic markers, so I am going back to my traditional coloring medium of just traditional colored pencils, and these are phenomenal. You don't need a whole lot of colors, and you don't need Gamsols either for blending. You just need to learn how to apply different amounts of pressure, and you also just learn how to naturally highlight, and you can even just color one simple image with one colored pencil. So I have some of these images stamped out. I'm going to show you the 3 different steps that I use for coloring. So I have 1, 2, 3, each image stamped out 3 times. And I'm using images from Lawn Fawns, Critters in the Park, Critters at the Dog Park, Cruising Through, and Hello Friend. And in addition to this, I also have this handy tool. It comes in the Essentials Toolkit. It's an eraser in a pencil form, and you can actually sharpen it, which is awesome. And I've stamped my images in black ink. You can use Memento, VersaFine, the Stampers Big Brush Pen in black, and you can get some really awesome images. The Stampers Big Brush Pen has the darkest, most vibrant ink. Then I would say the VersaFine, and then the Memento. Because we're not adding water, you don't have to worry about using anything that's permanent. But I am concerned with something that's light fast, so I would go with the Stampers Big Brush Pen. So to begin, I'm going to start with the smallest image, and this is the fire hydrant. So for the fire hydrant, which I am making red, I'm using 118, 121, 126, 101, and then the eraser from the Essentials Toolkit. To begin, I'm going to color very lightly the fire hydrant, and I like to imagine that there's the sun shining down on the fire hydrant, and I know this has a cylinder shape, so I'm going to have the right down the middle. I'm going to leave it a little bit more white, so I'm going to leave some white space and therefore have more of a highlight right down the center. And I recommend coloring in the direction and the shape of the natural shape of the image. So in a cylinder, you want it to be darker on the sides and lighter in the middle. So I'm going to apply a little bit more pressure on the sides, least amount of pressure in the middle, and then a little bit more pressure on the sides. And this is just our first layer of color, so it doesn't have to be perfect. But it'll just give you a good idea of how to lay down the color for the rest of the fire hydrant. These I'm going to leave a little bit more of a medium pressure. And then again, I'm going to follow these dark on the sides, a little light towards the middle, and again dark on the sides. So I'm just using varied amounts of pressure. So that's our first layer of color. Nothing fancy, nothing too detailed, but you get the drift. The sides are going to be darker, the highlight's going to be in the middle. And then I'll show you the second step. So here is my image. Try to color it in the exact same method. It's not always going to be the same, but now I'm going to take my darkest red, and that's 126. And I'm just going to apply some of the low light or the contrast of the image. So I've applied my dark, and then I'm going to use my middle red, which is more of the true red, for the last step. So again, I'm going to my medium red, which is 121, And I am going to use that to blend in the darker contrast with the evenness of that first layer. And again, I'm just going to use varied amounts of pressure. So more pressure towards the ends, less pressure in the middle. Don't be afraid of leaving some of the white space on the highlights. That's one thing I learned from art school, is to leave that natural white space. So I think that looks pretty good. If you want to add more of a highlight, use your eraser. And look at that. There's our fire hydrant. If you wanted to add more color for more contrast, or you want to keep building on that, you can add more layers so that it has more depth. But there you go. So here I have the dog image, and I will be using the 167, 176, and 132. And then for its nose, I'll be blending 119 with 132, using the white for some highlights, and of course my eraser for some highlights as well. So to begin, I'm using the 167, and I'm going to color it really lightly, leaving its feet and its nose and muzzle sort of exposed. So you can see I used just one color, applying different various amounts of pressure, and I added some more of the saturation in areas that might need a little bit more contrast, and I left areas that needed to be highlighted just a little bit lighter. So I'm going to color its muzzle and its stomach using these two colors. So I did it really lightly, you can barely tell, and then I'm going to move on to using these two colors. Okay, so now I'm going to take 176, which is the dark brown, and I'm going to add contrast to the areas that might not be well lit naturally on the dog. So going back to 187, I'm going to blend in those contrasts with the base color a little bit more. Again, if you want to add another layer of color to make it more saturated, you can do it if you're happy with that. I am happy with that, so I'll move on to the bicycle. So here's the bicycle image stamped from Cruising Through Life, and it's a very difficult image to color. You have three different variations. You have the basket, which you can make any color you want. I'm going to stick with the natural look. Then you have the bike frame itself, and then the tires. And anything that you color black is going to be very, very challenging. So I have some really good tips on how to use black when you color it. So to begin, I am going to start with the frame. And again, I am just going to imagine where the highlights would be naturally on this bike if the sun were shining down on it. You don't have to be exact. You could always go on Google and look up a bike image and just figure out where the realistic shadows might be, but I would just follow your instincts. So let's begin. So the bike I'm going to create is going to be like a mint green. So I want my base colors to be a combination of these two. Before we do that, I'm going to add the base color for the basket and then the base color for our black accents. Now we can move on to our second step. Okay, so I'm going to start with the easiest object to color, and that is the basket. With these 3D objects, I was always taught that the face looking at you is going to be the darkest face. And then the one in the front will have a lot more contrast because the sun's coming from this direction, so the bottom of half might be a little bit darker than the top. And then that the inside of the basket is going to be a neutral and dark as well. So I'm going to use my 176 and add some shading. Then I'm going to ease into what I feel is the second hardest thing to color, and that is the bike frame. There are a lot of highlights on this bike frame. So I'm going to start with my dark, which is 158, and just choose where I think the sun won't shine as much. Now to the most difficult, and that is adding your black. And you want to use this very, very sparingly. I found that keeping it very, very light at first and then gradually adding the color adds a lot of contrast and interest so that it's just not a boring flat black. So with the wheels, I'm going to highlight the tops and the bottoms. So the sides are going to be just a little bit darker. So I'm going to start with the sides. So it's very, very light. For the final steps of the bicycle, we're going to be adding more of a blend for into our contrast and highlights. We're also going to create more highlights with the eraser. So we want to take out our middle range colors and our darkest of each. And starting with the basket, because I feel like that's the easiest, I'm going to add another flat coat of this color, just to even it out. Then I'm going to move on to the bike frame, and I have that blue. I'm going to use this to blend those darker and lighter. Again, I'm leaving the highlights alone. We can erase away some of the highlights, but I want to leave some of them natural. Then I'm going to go to my gray and get into those dark areas that we colored and apply a little bit more dark gray into the black areas. And there we go. So here are our 3 images. I started with the easiest, the fire hydrant, and then we moved on to something a little bit more complicated, the little dog, and then we went into full-on difficult mode, and I showed you how to color the bicycle, applying the same techniques for the fire hydrant and the dog. So now I'll just show you how they look on finished cards. Well, here are the 2 cards I created. I made smaller cards. They measure 3.5 by 4 7/8. And here's my bicycle. I really wanted that bike image to stand out. And then here's the puppy with its fire hydrant. I added a colored pencil background as well as the butterfly and the little baseball. So I hope you enjoyed watching. Thanks again. This was Tiffany from iHeartArtBlog.com with the Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft team. Thanks for watching.